Okay, we will start this session. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Annisa Triyanti, for joining us. We will start this session. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fourth day of the ESL summer course. Now we have a lecture session with our research person. She come from the Netherlands. Yeah, we have Dr. Annisa Triyanti as our speaker, and she will deliver the topic related to the climate and disaster governance, lesson learned and a way forward. So this topic is a very interesting and emerging issue because now currently we have also the COP27 meeting in Egypt, and as well as also the G20 in Indonesia, which has a high level meeting in this week. And one of the issues also related to the energy transition, and of course the clean energy, how we leave the fossil fuel, which is causes the climate change. So I think this lecture session will be very interesting, especially for me and of course for all of the participants. And let me introduce a bit of the Dr. Annisa Triyanti. I will read the CV. So Dr. Annisa Triyanti currently is a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer working on the topic of water and climate governance in deltas. So I think in Indonesia, there is many problems relating to the climates and the water also. And then I think she also have many research in the 2022. There is many research related to this idea, this topic. And then also the Dr. Annisa now since the 1st of the December 2022 start working as an assistant professor of disaster risk and climate governance at the Environmental Governance Group, Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development in Utrecht University, the Netherlands. So Dr. Annisa obtained her PhD from the Governance and Inclusive Development Program, University of Amsterdam in 2019. And of course, the topic also related to the ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction governance in Indonesia and India. Such an interesting topic also. And then prior to the commencing her PhD research, she also worked as a lecturer and researcher in geography and environmental science at Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia in 2013 until 2017. And also she has done research on the topic of social capital, ecosystem-based approach, and community-based disaster risk management, especially on facing water-related disaster and climate change impact in the coastal and delta area in Indonesia. As we all know, there is the problem of the climate change in the sea level rise. It will be impacted to the most of the coastal and delta areas. So since 2014, Dr. Annisa has been a global youth advocate with experience in youth, civil society, and young scientist engagement as a stakeholder group representative on the intergovernmental level. She has a good understanding of the political and technical aspect of the global policy process on disaster risk reduction, climate, and sustainable development. She also appointed as the Young Scientist Representative to the Global Science and Technology Advisory Group for the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. So I think based on her short profile is very interesting, and I'm very sure that Dr. Annisa will give us a very fruitful discussion, very fruitful material, and also will enhance our knowledge related to the disaster risk reduction and climate change. So before we start, I try to make some information related to this course. So for all of the your participants, don't forget to present about the attendance. You can fill the attendance form. Later, I will share in the Zoom chat. And then I will separate this session for the presentation from the Dr. Annisa. It will be 40 until 50 minutes, and then after that we will discuss for almost 20 until 30 minutes. So you can prepare the question or anything you want to ask and discuss. Then it is a very good opportunity. You can learn from the expert about the disaster risk reduction. So I think that's all as the opening. So for the Dr. Annisa Triyanti, the time is yours, and you feel free to arrange your presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Mas Danang. It's a very complete introduction. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm very happy to be invited to speak in this online ESL IPB International Summer Course. It's an honor to be here and also to see so many participants are joining us. I think it gives a lot of energy for me. It's like almost 6 in the morning here in the Netherlands, but I'm very excited to be here and also to meet you all. Yeah, I was just wondering if some of you also wants to share your camera. I think it will be nice just to see that there are real people behind the Zoom account, let's say. And yeah, it will give me also more excitement to present. If you can, if not, I can completely understand. So no pressure, let's say. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about climate and disaster risk governance, lessons learned and way forward. I think the whole topic of this summer course is really about bouncing back from COVID-19 as well. So I'll be trying to also talk a little bit about that because, yeah, COVID-19 is also one of the example of health type of disaster as well. And I think it's very relevant to talk about it now, especially. Yeah, I think you all know me already. I'm working as lecturer and also a researcher, so I also give lectures in different courses in Utrecht University, mainly on sustainability and also climate change adaptation. Yes, so what I wanted to share with you today is that topic about climate governance and disaster risk governance in general, but I think it would be nice to start with getting more knowledge about the state of the art of the climate. So about global warming, anthropogenic causes, and also impact. But I'm also willing to share a little bit, maybe not too complicated, about the key concepts of disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and also governance, and also the importance of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation governance. Some of the international type of framework that govern disaster risk and also sustainable development, which are Sendai framework for disaster reduction and also sustainable development goals. Of course, this links to Paris Agreement, the current process of COP, etc. We're going to talk about it a little bit more. And to just give you a little bit of sense of how it is implemented, these concepts and all of the discussion about climate and disasters, I will give 2 illustrative case studies of governing disaster risk, learning from 2 types of disasters. One is the more creeping type of disaster like flooding in coastal area of Semarang, but also the type of sudden kind of disasters like what happened in Palu earthquake and its cascading effects in 2018. And then I will try to conclude with some lessons learned and reflections on governing disaster risk and also climate adaptation, especially in Asia, maybe. I think the context here is more on Asia and Indonesia. Right. Before that, I was thinking to have a more interactive type of session. So I'm going to stop sharing this presentation and then share with you the link in the chat so you can connect there. Meanwhile, I'll try to also connect to my browser. I don't know if you can see my browser. So it's called WooClap. Mas Danang, could you confirm that it's now shown?
Yes, this now is show.
Okay, great. So the background why I wanted to do this is just I wanted to know you a bit better. But the problem is we have limited time and then there's so many of you. So I'm going to do this exercise with you to know who you are and also your background and what do you expect from this lecture. I think it's always nice to be more interactive anyway. So I'll see that the numbers are ticking up, so 20 people. So I'm going to wait a little bit more for you to join this. I'm not sure, maybe this is also shared via YouTube as well, right, Mas Danang?
Yes, this is a live for YouTube also.
Okay, so anyone who's actually watching can also join and get in the WooClap platform. Okay, you can still see how to join, I think. I don't know why. Okay, right. So where do you come from? 2 countries, Indonesia, Malaysia. Maybe there are more. I'm going to wait. So yeah, it seems like, of course, most of the participants are coming from Indonesia. Perhaps there are more countries as well. Pakistan. Nice. Of course, it's also very relevant to talk about the case of Pakistan because of the recent flooding as well. Maybe we can discuss that later. Yes. So I think these are the majority of the countries where the participants are coming from. Let's move on. So the second question is, what is your educational level? I think it's just to help me a little bit on adjusting my message as well. And I think most of the content of the lecture is quite relatable, hopefully in the late terms as well. Okay, so most of you are now studying in the bachelor program, also master and also PhD. Yeah, so it's quite diverse. That's very nice. Okay. We are going to move forward with the next question. So what is your disciplinary background? I mean, example would be geography, law, of course. Yeah, okay, then I don't have to give an example. I think you get what I mean. Forestry, environmental economics, English literature, interesting, computer, agribusiness. Well, yeah, of course, IPB is very much also focusing on these disciplines. Right, so this is also nice that we have a quite diverse participants. But just to let you know, if you have any type of questions that relates to the term that I use, please feel free to put it in the chat so I can clarify that. I'm a human geographer by training, but I'm mostly working now on governance field. So perhaps if there's more like terminology that's too governance-y, let's say, let me know and then we can discuss that. Okay, now maybe this is the last question for now. So what have you learned so far in this summer course? I think there are already some lectures, right? Am I correct, Masana, before this session?
Actually, they have several lectures before this and a lot of diverse topic also. So I think there's also many interesting what they are learned.
Nice. Green energy, Asian problems. So good, because it's very relevant to what I'm going to talk about. Definition of poverty, carbon reduction, green energy, global warming. Climate change, of course, very big issue, and I think the focus of this summer course as well. Right, so I think we have the right audience, let's say, and it's easier also to see what type of expectation of material from this lecture that you expected. Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing, but thanks a lot for that. I get to know you better, also not yeah, maybe not personally, but it's nice to see the overview of your background. Okay, then I'm going to share my screen again. So let's start with the state of the art of the climate. I think maybe some of you are already familiar with this, but I'm going to just go through it quickly. So the phenomena of global warming and greenhouse gases. I think this is the key storyline of the whole issue of climate change. So we are experiencing the increasing heat, right? Especially after the industrialization era. As you can see here in the graph, that we experience more and more warming, and it's really alarming if you can see this where we are now in 2020. Some of the people arguing, especially the climate denials, arguing that it's a normal process, but if you can really see the graph here, that it's actually not normal, because what's normal is that it's there's fluctuation, etc. But when it comes to a very rapid type of warming increasing of warming like this, then we couldn't actually say that it's normal anymore. So what happened actually? This is a very common basic knowledge, but we know that the human activities actually produce greenhouse gases. One of the most major gas is the CO2, due to the industrial process, land use changes, and also fossil fuel combustions. Now, what does these gases actually do? So the phenomena is called the greenhouse effect. So the gases actually absorb and also reflect heat radiated by Earth, so preventing it from escaping to escape. So the sun that hits Earth is reflected back to space, while the rest becomes heat. So it's heat trapping process, basically. So when we talk about climate change, by definition here is that it is a long-term shift in temperatures, weather patterns. And of course, it's very interrelated to what we just discussed about, so about the global warming. So the increasing heat is, of course, causing ice sheet melting, and also increasing sea level rise. And then there are more evaporation. I think some of you maybe already learned about water cycle, hydrological cycle. In some area, it will be extreme flooding, but in other area will be extreme drought. So that's why it's called an extreme changes of weather patterns. So of course, this phenomena has a very negative impact to biodiversity and also human. And when we talk about the human side, the phenomena of flooding and also drought is of course going to affect agricultural sector, fisheries. So the source of food for human will be disrupted, and it's very bad for food security as well, among other issues that we are going to discuss even more. And who's going to actually be affected tremendously here? The most vulnerable people. This picture is to show like people who are actually living in poverty and also living in a very vulnerable and prone areas like small islands community, and also people who are living in the coastal and deltas area will be most affected. So what are the main anthropogenic causes of climate change? I think there's already some hints about the production of greenhouse gases. After the industrialization revolution, humans are generating more power, manufacturing more goods, cutting down forests, using transportation that are not sustainable, as well as producing and consuming food. Maybe you've also followed the news that recently the Earth already have 8 billion people living. So it really shows that the demand will be still increasing. We have to change something in the way we do our activities to make sure that there's less impact for the environment. Okay, so one of the strong reference for this phenomenon is the assessment report. The latest one is Assessment Report 6, produced by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So this is about impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. It shows really with high evidence that emission of greenhouse gases have grown in most regions, but of course they are distributed unevenly because, for example, people in the Western world actually produce more greenhouse gases, but the question then, who is actually bearing the more impact? We're going to talk about this later, but just to show you that human activities are very responsible for the warming that we are experiencing right now. So until now, I think we are now at 1.2 degrees, and if we cannot keep the warming to 1.5 degrees, there will be very grave consequences in the future. What's the impact then? You see that climate change has effect in terms of extreme changes of weather patterns, and also the processes like increasing of sea level rise. In 2100, it is projected that it could be 2.92 meter higher than pre-industrial level, and it will affect up to 250 million people and even more, and we will lose assets as well worth 6,500 until 9,000 billion US dollar. And Asia is actually the most vulnerable place to live with this phenomena of climate change. And of course, we're very rich in biodiversity and ecosystems, and they're also going to be threat to lose this ecosystems, let's say. And also, I think the Asian countries especially, we are very much focusing now in developing the countries, building infrastructure, development processes, let's say, economic growth. That's the focus of our region. And the more impact to climate change, then there will be more loss and damage in terms of infrastructure. But also in biodiversity, like I mentioned before, the threat of food security, to ecosystem, especially in the coastal areas, marine ecosystem like coral, and also coastal fisheries, the productivity will decline, and water security. So there will be more flooding, there will be more storm, there will be more drought, etc. So it's very important that to think about both mitigation and adaptation. I hope that some other lectures also already mentioned about this, so it has to go parallelly, let's say. So mitigation here is action to reduce emissions, so the greenhouse gases, and adaptation is action to manage the risk of climate change impacts. For mitigation, we could think about sustainable transportation, like Mas Danang just said, about the focus now in G20 is really about energy transition, etc. That's one way to do this mitigation effort. Have more clean energy efficiency, but we have to still do adaptation because we're living in a very vulnerable and prone areas. And our day-to-day lives depends on how we adapt to this climate impact. So that's why it's very important to talk about disaster management, for example, flood protection, if we talk about flood, and other type of adaptation to disasters. So that's why I'm going to very focusedly discuss on this issue, also because of my expertise, it is more on climate adaptation and also disaster risk reduction. So we're going to talk about key concepts. Again, if you have any question, I couldn't see it directly, but Mas Danang, please feel free to interrupt me if there is any strong question, and we can discuss it right away. So don't have to wait until the end. So I'm going to talk about the concept of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Now let's go back to WCLAB again. I hope that you haven't actually closed the WCLAB yet, because I have a question on that. And yes, so what is a disaster actually? Maybe you can type quickly, like maybe 30 seconds, whatever words that come to your mind. What is a disaster? I see like 0 people are joining. So perhaps you can check the link again. Is there a problem to join?
So just okay.
It's okay. We can wait a bit. Okay, something uncommon. Nice, there are more people logging in. Serious disruption of functioning of community and society, loss of life, misfortune. When you cannot fulfill your basic needs. Yeah, these are all, I think, very relevant if we hear the words of disaster. Okay, I'm going to wait for like 10 seconds just to see if there are more. Damage, something bad. Yeah, fair enough, a disturbance. Okay, thanks a lot for that. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. The power of technology, right? Okay, so this is a definition that I took from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. All of the comments, by the way, they're great. I mean, that's part of the definition of disaster. So disaster is a serious disruption. See, there's some keywords coming up, of the functioning of a community or a society at any scale due to hazardous event interacting with conditions of exposure, vulnerability, and capacity leading to one or more of the following: human, material, economic, and environmental losses and impacts. So there are components of disaster: hazard, exposure, vulnerability, capacity. I think we don't have to go one by one, but all of these together make a disaster risk. But the thing is, so many people still frame disaster as natural disasters. I think this is something that we have to correct. Because disasters always affect human or be impacted by human. So it's not fair to say it as a natural disasters. There is a movement now also within the scientific community to ban all the words of natural disaster, because disasters are actually not natural. Disasters are anthropogenic. It's us who actually make the disaster happens. By the way, there will be more debates on that. We can discuss that if you want later. But what I wanted to show you here is that there are different type of classification of disasters. One of the most commonly used is the peril classification by IRDR. So geophysical, hydrological, meteorological, blah, 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 and so on and so on. Yeah, so it depends on type of disasters, of course, and what kind of research or used on outcomes that you want. Of course, you can use this type of classification of disasters. But there's also a new development to this. I was one of the co-author of this report published by the UNDRR. So it's called New Hazard Definition and Classification Review. So with this report, we want to actually show the more anthropogenic side of disasters, that showing that disasters also systemic. So one failure of adapting or mitigating disaster will lead to cascading type of disasters. So it's not that disaster happened at that time, like earthquake, etc. That's hazard, but when it affects community, there should be a series of events that lead to that type of disasters. Okay, now we talk about climate change adaptation. So in human system, climate adaptation means that the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effect in order to moderate harm or exploit beneficial opportunities. While in natural system is about adjustment to actual climate and its effect. So human intervention, so our role is actually very, very big to facilitate the adjustment of climate and its effect. This graph shows the 2021 global risk outlook. If you can see this graph very closely, climate action values is perceived as most likely to happen in 2021. So here. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, we experienced it since 2020. So it's also kind of hand in hand with climate action failures. What's interesting is that the weapons of mass destruction also seen as higher impact, but likelihood here in 2021 doesn't seem to be high. I'm wondering if you know why. why I discuss about weapons of mass destruction. What kind of event recently that leads me to this kind of highlight? Anything maybe in the chat? No? Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to just answer it myself. Well, COVID-19, yes, it leads to the infectious diseases, but it is linked to infectious diseases, but the weapons of mass destruction is more of the war type of thing. Yes, exactly. So the Ukraine war, for example, in 2021, people were actually doing this survey, think that, of course, the impact will be high, right? Because there is just so much at stake, world peace. But they think that it will not likely to happen, but it happens. So the key points here is that disaster is always uncertain. And we shouldn't forget about being anticipatory to this type of event. So, okay, so lessons learned from COVID-19. Like I mentioned before, so our understanding of disaster has changed since many events recently. That it's not about one type of event that happens, earthquake or flood whatsoever, but it's a cascading effect, is a product of a systemic issues across sectors, across systems and borders. COVID-19 is not necessarily only disaster in terms of health, but also disaster in terms of economy. How many people lost their jobs? How many people have to move from the middle income to the low income level, let's say. So the risk of climate change also discussed in link to COVID-19, right? There's like a lot of arguments that and also evidence that COVID-19 happens because of that we cannot leave the nature alone, basically. So there's something wrong with the way we perceive and manage nature, let's say. And COVID-19 also amplifies existing vulnerabilities. So if you don't have a good income because of the impact of COVID-19, means that you're even more vulnerable to other type of hazard and disasters. And of course, health is the most important issue here. And it hampers, COVID-19 hampers the progress towards the achievement of SDGs. That's not undisputable, I think. But it gives a lot of lessons for us in terms of prevention, preparedness, trust, more trust to science and evidence, and how it can be actually applied to decision making in the future. Right, so I'm not sure if you have heard about the term Anthropocene. How many of you know what Anthropocene is? Perhaps you can share it in the chat as well. So let me check if there's any. Let's see if there's any. I couldn't actually see the chat. Is there anyone in the chat sharing their thoughts, Mazdana, about the Anthropocene?
Not really.
Okay.
But this Farah answer.
Okay, Farah. Okay, you said you haven't heard it yet. So the Anthropocene is actually an era of human domination in a geological epoch. So because we are really having, how do you call it, a lot of dominance in the way we change nature, we actually influence nature. So it's an era by itself. Industrialization, for example, is one of the signs of the era of the Anthropocene. But what does it mean? Okay, we are the one who is actually causing all of these disasters and climate change, etc. But we are the one who can actually shape our future. And we have the responsibility. And I think if we can think about more of the positive side, the raising activism from the youth, for example, shows that this is the first generation that really realize how bad we actually behave from the past decades, and how big is actually the action, the role of our action right now to change our future. That brings me to the issue of governance. If I talk with someone who is not having a background of governance field whatsoever, what is governance? Most of them will say that's the way of steering by the government. But I think there is a new development also in the studies and the way we see our society, that governance is not always about government. It's about the role of actors to actually steer and getting opportunity from problems, let's say. Actors here means not only government, but also you and me as individual, you as a student, civil society, local community. So they are also actors. And the success or failures in our efforts right now to change the trajectory of human lives is really in our hands. So that's why it's very important to talk about governance. Like I mentioned, it's about steering mechanism to reach collective goals. Our collective goals, I would say, sustainable development. It can be changed, whatever goals you have in mind. We
Sorry,
talk about
Dr.
the
Annisa.
problem. Yes.
Sorry, Mbak, there is a question from
Okay.
the Muhammad Sikandar.
Yes.
Do you can see in the chat or not?
Yes,
Or I will.
can.
Okay.
I will try to read it. Or maybe Muhammad Srikandar, you wanted to just jump in and then ask your question. Perhaps it's nicer if you can. Otherwise,
Yes,
I can
of
read it
course.
as well. Do you want to open your mic? Okay, otherwise we can also just, I can also just read it, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
So Ukraine and Kashmir war is different. In Asia, major issue for poverty is Kashmir issue. Kashmir is occupied area in India, Pakistan and India, poverty and climatic issues and river issues, the conflict between India and Pakistan issue on Kashmir occupies area. Yes, I totally agree. I discussed with my Indian colleagues as well on how complex the problem in Pakistan and India is right now, especially related to conflict, etc. I think this is a really big threat for humanity, you know, because peace and also coordination, collaboration between countries are crucial, especially to deal with this type of global issues like climate and also disaster risks and our efforts to achieve sustainable development. But the problem is how then to solve this. And I think there are not really answer to this. It keeps getting back to the issue of political interest between countries. But thank you for that comment. I think we can also save that for the discussion later on, if you don't mind. Okay, so I will move on with the governance diagram that I made here, just to show what's the power of governance. Why do we need governance? So we talk about the problem of Anthropocene as a context that human actually dominated in the Earth system, and there are a lot of bad impacts. If we talk about climate change, the issue is now about how to govern adaptation and transformation. You can also change it to mitigation, whatever issues at hand. But what's important now then, when you talk about governance, about interactions. So how each actors can interact and find common goals. Do we have actually institutional structures that are adequate to govern this? Of course, there are line of ministries, there are agencies, whatsoever. I think the important issue here is about coordination. Modes, so governance modes means here, perhaps in Asia, the most common governance modes is actually the top-down type of modes, so that the national government actually have more power, have more influence, etc. But there's also opportunities in terms of the power of local communities to govern as well, participation, etc. And on top of that, the most important thing is actions, right? And how to actually implement all the policies on the ground, let's say. The goal for governing is actually systemic institutional change. When we talk about issues like climate change and disaster, it's very important to be flexible because there are constant changes, constant threat. So it's very important to anticipate this type of issues. There are different ways to do it. For example, having good coordination is one issue. The other thing is to have more redundancy, for example, complementary tasks between different governance agencies, etc. So when one actually failed to do something, the other one will pick up. something like that. And systemic institutional change will help to realize societal change and transformation. So hopefully it will change our behavior and way of life, because we're talking about the Anthropocene and we talk about Earth system. So radical change is very much needed. And we have technology and innovation to help us, but I put here minus and plus, negative and positive consequence of technology has to also be considered. Right, so this is also very conceptual, but I'm going to discuss it. Maybe you're going to be interested to look into this more. So there is one concept called Earth system governance, where you can actually check all of the different type of lenses to identify problems in Earth system governance, including climate and disaster governance, talk about institution, talk about democracy and power. So it's about who can participate and have the power to influence, talk about justice and allocation. So who has to bear the cost and receive benefits, who are included and excluded. Issues of COP is very interesting example because of the whole discussion on loss and damages. If you follow, most countries in the South believe, and there are also evidence that the global North actually produce more emission. Therefore, they have to take the responsibility to help the countries in the global South. It's not an act of philanthropism, but it's act of good gesture and understanding of their responsibility in the past, let's say. Yeah, there's also element of anticipation and imagination. This is also very important for climate and disaster issues. So what will the future bring? We have so many disasters, but what have we learned from it? Can we actually predict them better in the future in terms of hazard? Can we actually deal with them better in the future, and how we do it? Adaptiveness and reflexivity means, how to learn from the past and also better to deal with disaster in the future as well. Okay, so for global architecture, we talk about COP. Of course, Paris Agreement is very important climate framework. But for disaster risk, we also have Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Interesting fact is that Paris Agreement, Sustainable Development Goal, and SFDRR, they are actually adopted in the same year. For Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, it also have the same goal, so to achieve the target in 2030, but then the focus is, of course, to reduce disaster mortality, number of affected people, economic loss, damage, and increase national policies and strategies, cooperation, and also increase early warning system and information. So what's the relation between Sendai framework and SDGs? The key pointer here is that if we cannot achieve Sendai framework, it means that we cannot achieve SDGs, because it links to a lot of different goals and targets of SDGs. I mean, SDGs is really trying to provide this kind of overview of all the problems that we have and what we have to do with them to ensure sustainability. So who are the actors when we talk about Sendai framework? I mean, I work since 2014 until 2017 as a youth advocate and also global scientist representative. And this is the arena where I worked at that time. They have stakeholder engagement mechanism where civil society, children and youth, where my constituencies were, and also non-governmental organization, but also science. So this International Science Council, for example, they are actually working hand in hand. And it's very interesting multi-partnership type of thing, because we have to really try to get the same goal, have a common language. And I think that's very interesting. Now that I experienced two type of arena of working, so science, but also intergovernmental panel like this, because it's totally different. And we have to really think about common goals rather than thinking about our own interests and disciplines. Right, so is there any questions so far in terms of Sendai framework and global arena for disaster risk reduction? Of course, we can talk more also about climate change like IPCC, etc. But I think for the sake of time, we can also keep it this way and discuss later if there are more interest. Chat, okay. Muhammad Sikandar said there was network issue. No worries, but really thank you for the remark. Yeah, so illustrative case studies. These are cases that I studied especially for my PhD and also recently with colleagues from BRIN, from how do you call it in Bahasa Indonesia, Mas Danang? National Science Agency, is it?
No, it's the yeah, I think like the National Science Agency.
Yes, I'm sorry if they're like BRIN colleagues watching.
Yeah. Oh, National Research and Innovation Agency. Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for the correction.
So yeah, this is a case of Semarang and the MAC area. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this. Maybe some of the students come from this area. Because I think for IPB, I think it's West Java, but of course there are more research outside, right? Maybe some of you also doing research here. So I did this research for my master thesis. And then after that, when I applied for PhD scholarship, I thought, why not just expand it and then explore and compare it with other countries as well that has kind of similarities and differences, of course. By the way, so I'm going to talk about this case, the Indonesian case of my PhD research. So this area is very important. Semarang is known as a very strategic area in terms of trade because of the harbor, but also in terms of the cities. There are so many people living there, industries, a very strategic economic area where people live, of course, as well. So 1.1 million people living. I'm focusing now in the rural area part, let's say. So the MAC part, but of course there's relation to Semarang. And for this part of the area, they are dependent on the ecosystem. So food, fish, agriculture are their main livelihood, let's say. But this area, as for the other coastal areas in Indonesia and other countries, are experiencing sea level rise, erosion, land subsidence, floods, land loss, of course, because of the erosion, coastal flooding, and unsustainable aquaculture. And they are all actually interconnected. So the main type of disaster that I wanted to focus here is the creeping type of disasters, because as you can see here, maybe in one of the maps, these were actually land where people live. But then since 1990 until now, it got eroded so bad where people has to actually be relocated. One of the major issue is erosion. And then there were evidence that the unsustainable development of the adjacent cities, the Semarang area, and also the land subsidence because of the groundwater extraction, actually cause the erosion and also the submerged area in the MAC. So if you think closely, there's an issue also of justice, right? The cities got more explored their resources, but then other area has to bear the consequences, let's say. So the governance challenges. The strategies that are using right now, until now, I believe, I'm still doing research here to see the progress of their efforts, is called ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, my topic. So they use the service of mangroves to actually become a barriers to coastal flooding, to the wave. But the problem is that it's not enough because the mangroves in this area is also now very scattered. One of the issues why mangroves is degraded here in this area is the opening of shrimp ponds, the unsustainable aquaculture. So you see there's a relation there. But there are efforts also from foreign countries like the Netherlands, where I'm actually located, to actually try a new innovation to combine mangrove and permeable dike, perhaps here too small, I think, to actually help more sedimentation in this area. with hope that with their more sedimentation, mangrove will be able to be grown again. And then it will give a full protection to communities who are living behind it. So although you see that there's like almost no land, but if you see the lines here, there are actually still people living there. Yes. So the governance challenges here is the piecemeal approach, because of course it's one part of the whole coastline. But if we see Semarang with the planning of development, etc., problem is we don't know if they're actually integrated or not. It's very important to have this type of integrated coastal zone governance, let's say, because if you change something in one part of the coast, it will affect the other. So piecemeal approach in this sense, perhaps helping in terms of building innovation, new innovation, such as the pilot project here, the hybrid type of effort, combining mangroves and permeable dike, but it will not be sustainable unless there are change in terms of integrated coastal zone. So what do we do with the land subsidence issue? What we do with groundwater extraction, etc. What do we do with urbanization and unsustainable settlements and development? Again, also issues of social justice very important. Or before that, aligning the goal, motivation, and diverse stakeholders, because these are different administration. One is a city and one is a regency. And we have a very complicated levels, different levels, governance levels, let's say. Do they actually have the same goals and motivation? Issue of social justice is important. So urban versus rural area and vulnerable people. So who's bearing the impact of maladaptation? Issue of accountability is also important because of the different levels of governance. They're most of the time fragmented, and legitimacy. So problem of justifying knowledge and decision-making process as well. Most of the knowledge for this innovation comes from Netherlands, for example, but then how to actually adjust it with the local context. However, if you see on the bright side, there's also opportunities in terms of the way people govern themselves. It's called self-governance. So the local community has more role, actually. And then an inception of transformative project is not bad, it's very good. And then it also improves the awareness of the actors about the problem and the need of solution. But then again, challenges is how to integrate and make sure that they're sustainable. Okay, one more case is the Palu disaster, and this is a very, very complicated, of course, devastating event. If you hear about it, of course, it's a very big event in Indonesia in 2018. Earthquake, tsunami, liquefaction. So it's a very bad event again, but it's a perfect example of multi-hazards and systemic hazards. Earthquake, tsunami, and liquefaction, we see it as a kind of natural type of thing. They're connected, but maybe you can say they're natural hazards. But then the more anthropogenic side is, of course, the governance, how we deal with that, and the historical residual risks. So such as traumatic communal conflict, because it changed the way society form, let's say. There's conflicts, means that they are more vulnerable because they don't have social capital, etc. They are actually aware about this past of previous earthquakes. So it happens before. And they even actually make a song about it. So Goya Goya Gantiro, I don't know how to sing it, by the way, but basically it's a story and a folk song about earthquake. And also you see the translation, there are different areas that were actually drowned, let's say. So there's this historical events that lead to that kind of cascading disasters. And there are even more evidence from the Dutch newspaper in 1938, because that's the Dutch colonization time, in Dutch, actually showing the earthquake event in Midden-Celebes. So it can maybe be predicted. Of course, earthquake, I'm not a seismic geodesy scientist whatsoever. And I heard also that earthquake is very difficult to predict. But the question is, have we learned from the past? Were there actually efforts to collect all of this archive, understanding the changes in society after disasters, to be able actually to help us to deal with that when that event happened again, like in 2018. In terms of challenges, why this event happened, I think there are different explanation of course, but what we can see and what we also analyze in the paper that I wrote together with the BRIN colleagues, that there were incomplete understanding of hazards, also incomplete understanding of histories of disasters. And usually up to before Palu, I think our policy is very much on single hazard-based assessment. So if there's flooding, we react to the flooding, let's say. But then we don't know how to relate or deal with the different type of hazards combined together as a multi-disasters. Lack of capacity or also neglection of risk also lead to this event. In terms of emergency response or what happened after that, of course, there are so many foreign funding and also help from the national government. But still there are issues like lack of adequate shelter, lack of coordination and leadership. I heard it's even named as a tsunami of funding, let's say. And then it makes very unclear on how to coordinate different efforts. And there's still asymmetric power relations in emergency response, because of course, this is a very important event for potential policymaker in the future. So there are political opportunities coming from disaster, let's say. Post-disaster, it was difficult for people to find alternatives to recover, and there's misperception of risk, because risk information is very important, not only by scientists, but also for people. And I think it's our task to translate this data into a most understandable information for local communities. Opportunities here is that Indonesia has already long experience of disasters, and we see that it's shifting the paradigm of disaster to more systemic part. And Palu is, of course, lessons learned from the perspective of systemic risk framework. We see that ecosystem service based solution has been mentioned. Also, not only in the MAC, we see the example of the MAC with mangrove, but also in Palu, because they see it as an opportunity. And local knowledge and identification is very important. And we have resources. I mean, we see how local communities actually have more knowledge about disasters in the past. One of the last slide that I have. So normative issue. When we talk about climate, disasters, Earth system problem, justice and equality is a very important aspect. I just took this figure because I thought it's very interesting to see how this negotiation happens. A lot of highlights on how we have this commitment, all of the global leaders agree. These are great and important. The political awareness and political will is important, but then how to actually implement it, that's the most important part. So not only talking, but also doing. And the issue of differences and injustices from global north and global south is also should be even more highlighted, let's say. It is now with the loss and damage, but still there are so many hidden arguments, hidden how do you call it, negotiations, doubt in terms of implementation when we talk about this commitment of helping, etc. Question is how and when we do it and how to do it, and then will it actually change the system? So the key issue is the world is changing, but safeguarding norms and values remain the same. Do not underestimate the political dilemmas and systemic injustice. So who gets to decide the future? What's the role of climate colonialism? how to embed participatory approach, how we can involve marginalized and vulnerable communities, not just as a tick boxes, and how to ensure intergenerational justice, meaning that we do this for you, for the next generation. The next generation do this, all of these efforts to change the trajectory of human lives for their children and grandchildren. So it's very important to think about this. Okay, so last slide. So climate change, disaster are anthropogenic problems. So please refrain for using natural disasters. And disasters are not produced instantly. It's a symptom of bigger problems. And climate and disaster governance is a very essential aspect to change the situation, to have a better sustainable future. And governance strategy should be designed based on the contextual conditions, so not only, for example, getting an intervention or technology from other countries and then try to apply it that way. We have different systems, we have different culture, and it's very important to think about these contextual issues. And lastly, issue of social justice and also political asymmetry is very important to work on. Perhaps for policymakers, this can be challenging because they're the one who's doing and implementing as like day-to-day activities and process. For natural scientists, maybe studying about politics is a hindrance because you put complexity in the front, you put the problem in the front. But I think if we think about how to deal with real life problems, we have to think and discuss about political issues and power. Okay, these are some references. Maybe I can also share the slides with you, Mas Danang, and you can share with the participants. Thank you for your attention. Maybe we can move forward with the discussion, let's say.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mbak Dr. Annisa. We can give the applause to her. Okay, actually there's one question, but from Gulam Yasin related to the question. Perhaps Gulam can ask directly, but also for the other participant, you feel free to ask and discuss the very interesting topic. In addition to the Gulam question, I think I also have the several questions based on your explanation, especially about your case in Demak. Yeah, you know, in Demak and also in Semarang, the case is not new. I mean, so what you see from the link of the governance, I think especially the relation between the local government and then it's also the central government. For example, is it there have some of the conflict or the sum of the coherency in tackle this problem? And I think the problem also is, if I'm not mistaken, many people who have been relocated to the new place, but they also came back to the place where they live. If I'm not mistaken, in case of the Denmark, if I'm have information. So what is the main factor when we are come to the adaptation and the mitigation for the small people? Yeah, usually because they have a connection with the economic aspect in the location. I think this like the question for the first before we are open the other question. Thank you, Mbak Annisa.
Thank you so much for the question, Mas Danang. It seems like you're very familiar with the case because indeed the issue of this so-called decentralization dilemma, right?
Yes.
Decentralization is the type of governance mode that Indonesia and also other countries are now going forward with, let's say. More power, more budgeting power, influence, task are now distributed to the local governments, let's say. And I think there are two ways to see it always. Of course, it's good because on the one hand, they're the one who actually on the area and they know exactly their area. They know the people. It makes it easier for them to contextualize policies based on their local experience. On the other hand, we still have issues with decentralization because of capacity, right? because it's only new for us, maybe already some years, but then it's still considered new that we move forward from a more centralized to decentralized type of governance, more national government based to the local government base. So there are more capacity needed for also local government officers in terms of organizing, governing their area, and also to coordinate with national government, because decentralization doesn't mean that it will cut the whole how do you call it, structure between different levels, let's say. And there was some regulations that were quite confusing, at least when I was there to do the research, that their distribution from I forgot the UU number, the UU number, but then it was already at the task of a local government, but then
Yes.
this task is going back to the provincial government again. Is it 23? Yeah, it's about decentralization issues. And I think that was very confusing for the local governments that I interviewed, for example, because they said, like, we're just about to gear up to really do something, and then now we have to give back the mandates to the provincial government. So this fragmentation issues, administrational bureaucracy really hampers the work on the ground. Yeah, your second question about the economic conditions. Yes, I do agree. Some of them actually came back because they don't have options. I mean, before there was like a agriculture, I think rice farms. Before it becomes saline, let's say the brackish, let's say the area was rice farm, and then they moved to this fish pond livelihood, and then the erosion and flooding submerged area that they have to move out, but they do not have any other options in terms of livelihood. The only thing they know is on farming back to their area, and also fishing. Some of them also fishers. I remember. So then the question is how, if there is this type of project, right, innovation, mangrove-based solutions whatsoever, how we can combine that with livelihood. So one way is to have the silvophishery methods. Maybe some of the IPB people knows about this, like combining mangrove ponds, base ponds to for fisheries, for shrimp ponds. So it's more sustainable type of fisheries, aquaculture, let's say. But still, it's still an issue. So how do you help the people to find alternative strategies for livelihood? And who is responsible for that? It's also the question.
Yeah. Of course, there's a long discussion also about this topic, and then I will try to pick the audience to ask the question, because I think they, I don't know, this not confidence or not, but I will pick Farah. Hello, Farah. Can you hear me? Do you have some question? Oh, okay, this is the question first from the Sikandar. Okay. That is a very long question from Sikandar.
Yeah, but maybe Sikandar wants to also
Yeah,
share
open
himself.
just open mic, Sikandar, please, and share
if
to
it's
us.
Possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then easier for me to understand as well.
Yeah. Okay, Sikandar is open. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah.
My question is that Ukraine war is changing the world pattern due to its side effect, and the world is solving the Ukraine problem at United Nations level because it's affect the economy of Europe. But the global community is not see together for the Kashmir issue. That is the basic problem of India and Pakistan. Here the population, such as India has the #1 population community. But the Pakistan and India poverty due to Kashmir issue, because here the trading not well because political issue. But here the United Nations or your global community are not set together to solve this problem. My question is that Ukraine, war, and Kashmir. Here, the global community are totally different mindset and ideology. What did you say that global community are the same ideology or yet different both cases?
Yeah. Should I answer to that, Mas Dana? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah,
But I think
yes. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Sikandar. Yeah, again, I think it's the issue of framing again, framing problems between global north and global south. When it comes to issues like energy, problem here is really a big problem. Yeah, big frame as a very, very big issue that, of course, compared to war and conflict in Asia and other countries in the south, they are not actually being highlighted so much. The same case with the problem of flooding in Pakistan, when Europe was flooded with actually less impact to people's life. Of course, more impact for damage of infrastructure because they have more things and more,
Right.
you know. But then, yeah, it's not covered actually in a balanced way, and that's just how the world works, right? Who gets more money? Who is more living in the more developed countries? They have more influence, etc. That's just a very injustice systems that unfortunately we are living on. And for the case of Kashmir, for example, and India and Pakistan, I think this is a very long standing issues. At some point, people doesn't talk about it anymore in a global level, and I thought it's a pity. And yeah, either they don't think that it has much interest on themselves and their lives. That's why there are less coverage on that, or it's just because there are no resolving issues available. I talked with one of my, I mentioned this before, one of my Indian colleagues, and she was actually doing research on this conflict, and we're talking about what would be the best solution, what are the mechanisms that can solve this Indian-Pakistani conflict. And they said that, yeah, perhaps SAARC will help, the South Asian regional cooperation, but it seems like because the problem is very much socio-culturally embedded, it is still not resolved. So I'm not sure, because I'm not an expert, and of course you are, Muhammad Sikandar, so perhaps you can even give us more enlightenment on these issues rather than I tell you what I think about that.
And second question is that
yes,
the government have not functionally implemented the environmental issues such as CDM project or Scope 27 happening. Our government are not well.
Hello, this the problem of the connection, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah, okay, Sikandar, you can just type the question, but this the other question, Mbak Annisa, this one from the Robbie Fauzan. Yeah, this is interesting about the idea how we don't move the people which one affected from coastal Java and also the other part to the Kalimantan or Sumatra. Perhaps you can tell what is usually become a barrier to people when they want to relocate, and then in case even there is a severe disaster or there is something happen in the area. Okay.
Yes, thank you for this question. Very interesting. I couldn't restrain myself to talk about the moving of the capitals.
yeah
Because it's the same issue, like Jakarta. I mean, I'm from Jakarta, by the way, and then of course it's got flooded every year. And the move of the capital from Jakarta to Kalimantan is also framed as one of the climate adaptation type of strategy. So it's called retreat. So we kind of moved the area, so then we don't have to deal with the problems anymore, which I think it's not that simple, let's say, because you also move the problems there. That's the thing. the same thing with your example or ideas of moving people from northern coastal Java to Sumatra and Kalimantan, because if you move people, you move also their identity, their socio-cultural perspective and understanding to a new place where there are also different socio-cultural practices and beliefs, and that could lead to conflict. And I think this happens also with the transmigration program. I think, I don't know, is it 1997, Mas Dana? When the era of Suharto?
Yeah, it's a very long time, very long time ago, I think, 20
Yes,
years ago, but no, it's not
yeah,
really effective also, the program.
yeah, there was this issue of this conflict, right? So I think
Yes, yes.
moving is a very technocratic and maybe sounds easy if you have money, but then it doesn't
Yes.
actually really solve the problem. I don't remember how it was in the transmigration area, because 1997 I was 8, so I don't know. Really, I just heard that it's not very much solving the problem.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Previously, yeah, because the people is not too much in the Kalimantan and Sumatra, but now I think the people also is same in Kalimantan, even in Sumatra also. There's a lot of people live over that, and also the
Yes. Mas Danang, are you there? Because we couldn't hear you anymore. I don't know if it's only me.
Okay, sorry. I think this my connection is unstable. Sorry.
Now you're back. Now you're back.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So yeah, it's talking about the problem of the transmigration is also talking about the issue now is in Sumatra and Kalimantan, also about the environmental issue because they are facing the deforestation or something like that. So there's other question related to the do you think that is the organic idea? I don't know whether you have a knowledge of, or not in this area, but this question from the Morset, how do you think about the cultivating in organic way, perhaps like the agriculture and organic agriculture have a relation also perhaps to the environmental change in term, for example, it's just causing also the disaster, isn't it, in the environmental problem like the pollution to the water and something like that. Is it also calculated in the term of the disaster risk reduction or not, perhaps in your knowledge? Thank you.
Yes, it's like a creeping type of disaster, right? With all of these issues of soil pollution, etc. And of course, then it will affect, I don't know, perhaps people from IPB can explain this process. Yes, but it's like it reduced the quality of the environment and capacity of environment to actually deal with this type of shocks, like more runoff if you don't have a healthy soil. But then for maybe agriculture, I think the issue or idea is to have more variety that can deal with climate impacts is very important to explore more. But maybe from the governance side, because it can count as innovation. So I was wondering maybe if there's also studies in ESL that tries to see the acceptance of local farmers of this new variety, etc. Because I think it's important to consider the social cultural aspect as well. Not only innovation and technology, but really how it can be implemented smoothly, let's say.
Yeah, but this is also related to the agriculture cultivation. And then this, I think I want to link the issue when we discussing about the problem in Delta area, the problem is also coming from the, from the upland, or from the upstream. For example, like you said, you live in Jakarta, so the problem is not from Jakarta also, but how we can deal with the puncak situation or even in Central Java. So how this perspective we can see in the term of the governance, because we only focus only in the downstream area, for example, like make a dike and then make the like the river normalization or any other program like the mangrove. Is it? I think it's not only the solution. So in terms of this situation, it should be any combination of the mixed policy between the upstream and the downstream, or we just need to focus more in the downstream area?
No, I think it's very clear that the coordination between upstream and downstream is very important. Case of Jakarta, of course, the cause of flooding is because of the unsustainable development and housing in the upstream areas. And the people who are mostly impacted are people who lives in low-lying areas as well. I mean, in case of Mekong Delta, for example, I don't know if there are colleagues from Vietnam. The way that the hydro dam was built in upper stream of China until Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, for example, it really gives a really bad effect to the downstream areas in terms of fisheries, sediments, nutrients, etc. So it's very important to see policy not only based on the specific cities or administrational boundaries, but also in terms of ecoregion, because governing environmental issues cannot only be based on a box of cities or villages or whatever administration level you have, because it's about the ecosystem. It's about the whole system, let's say. Talking about Jakarta, by the way, it's an advertisement. We just published a policy brief that I co-edited. I put it in the chat. Perhaps you'll be interested to also see that, because we discuss also about these different challenges of governing upstream and downstream part, different administrational boundaries, etc.
Okay, thank you. There's also a question from Daniel. Daniel, could you open your mic and ask the question? I think it's also the interesting question related to the behavior. Yes, Daniel.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to ask the question, and also thank you, Doctor, for the presentation. Yeah, actually, I want to ask about. Actually, I do agree that we are, as a human, we are the main culprit for all of the disasters, events, and then we are the one who are capable in minimize or we are in stopping it. But somehow I do feel that as individual we are sometimes we are not sometimes like every time we are powerless, because as individual it's hard to act on the preventions and living in this world. Sometimes it's like we are living in a time bomb. It's because sometimes I think we just wait for the disasters to happen, and then there's not much that we can do to prevent, because all of in the future there will always be disasters as a consequence of our actions today. And of course, when we act as a global, we can do something to prevent us or stopping it. But and then there's come another issue, that how we want to raise the awareness on to everyone to act together on stopping it or preventing it. And we do and we don't know what type of disaster, but we can predict what kind of disaster that will happen. And then for this, I think, as individual, it's always hard. But what is your opinion, Doctor? Thank you.
I can totally relate to that. Thank you for the question. I mean, especially as a person who studied disasters, I'm not even sure if I'm prepared, right? I mean, because of the uncertainty. But indeed, by informing ourselves and our vicinity about the risk of disasters, like in Jakarta, the apparent risk is flooding, right? So, for example, in 2020, the house of my parents also got flooded. After so many years has not been flooded, finally it got flooded, you know. But then just start with your own vicinity, let's say, having a disaster kids being informed about what type of disaster that could happen, inform your family, inform your friends. And I think, in that way, you also give an example to other people on how to be more prepared. Of course, it's a very big issues, because we're dealing with uncertain, how do you call it, physical system as well, that sometimes cannot be predicted. But I do see that we have a role on at least risk awareness. and communications, let's say, to whoever, people that are close to us, your students, your peers, of course, the most important thing, your family, but then government in the sense also have a very, very big role then, because in terms of long-term policy, a bigger change of preparedness, they have more influence. But if I don't know if some of the students here are also active in student organizations, for example, or youth activism or youth organizations, I think you can play a really, really big part on this. Check also one platform called You Inspire Indonesia. They're very much focusing on young students and also professionals who wants to help in terms of increasing risk awareness, studying disaster risk. So you can do it in different roles. I would say there are no prescription that you have to do this and that, but see what you can do based on your role. Maybe for me, it's informing my family with my research, let's say, and publishing paper for scientific roles, let's say, scientific contribution. But for any one of you, you can see your own capacity in your own role, let's say. That's what I can say.
Yeah, of course. I do really agree with you. This everyone can take a part, even in the small part. Okay, and then thank you also for the sharing the uninspired information. Okay, the next question is 2 questions from the 3. I think 3 Wirayuwati. Would you like to open your mic and ask the question directly? Yeah, please.
Thank you, Mas Danang. Thank you, Dr. Annisa, for your inspiring presentation. I just want to know what is your opinion on the budget for disaster, especially fire hazard, like forest fire. As you know that the national budget can only be released when it is declared as national disaster. But actually, forest fire can be prevented by several actions. And this is what we have found when we did focus group discussions with the local government of Pulang Pisau district in Central Kalimantan. Actually, they, the lack of fund for the fire prevention. But since they cannot also assess the budget for fire when it's not declared as fire national hazard. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Annisa.
Yeah.
Yes,
thank you
so much. Thank you for the question. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not very specialized in fire hazard, but I could see in the bigger picture that the policy of disaster risk, especially in developing countries, are very much still reactive, let's say, when it happens, and we see how we deal with that, but not really on prevention, especially prevention that relates to a very high uncertainty type of disasters like earthquake, also fire hazard, for example. But I could see more of the role of local governments indeed. But then again, the challenge of decentralizations come in again here, right? If you have lack of capacity in terms of budgeting to work with your own constituency, your area, then it's a problem. Then you're very dependent on the national government. So with this type of challenges in governance, I think it's very easy, especially scholars in Global North, to say, yeah, then you do community participation, you do community management, you do, I don't know, social capital. I mean, I did study social capital. It can help, but it's not enough. So it needs like a political will as well, and funding and capacity building. So ideal situation would be you have a very strong community who is aware about the risk and can help themselves with self-governance, with their own capacities. But what happens if people don't have capacity? If they're living in poverty, they couldn't even spend their time because they have to work, etc. So then there should come other strategies. Government here is very big role. Maybe NGOs, champions, local champions that can be creative in terms of creating opportunities. I mean, there are so many environmental funds, etc. I wouldn't say we should be dependent on that, but there are some kind of creative resources that someone can tap into. But again, focus is systemic change. So focus is a more of a long-term sustainable type of strategies. And for our country, the role of national government is still very, very high on this matter. So I don't know if I can answer more than that, Ibu Triwira. I think you're more expert than me, especially with your work in, where was it, Sumatra?
Sentra
Oh,
Pulau
Kalimantan.
Pisang in
Sentra
Kalimantan.
Kalimantan, yeah. In
Yes.
Pulang Pisau district. Because
Okay.
most of the land are pit land, and it's very, very prone to fire. So,
Okay.
yeah. But
Yeah.
thank you, Bu Annisa.
Thank you for your question.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Bu Tri. And then I think I will close to the last two questions, because I think coming to the end, people are now hitting to ask the more question. But I will limit to the last question because our time is also limited. And then the next question is from Farah. Farah, you want to ask directly?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Of course, yeah, you can open the mic and ask directly to Mbak Dr. Annisa, please.
Ya, makasih Pak. Okay, I'm sorry, Miss Annisa, that I can open my camera because there's a signal problem in here. So I want to ask about there's a dry weather, higher sea levels EPC that predicted in 2050. So will the impact be greater than we have ever experienced before, maybe a long way before? And what is our best shot to prevent these changes? Or we actually don't have any and must adapt, something like that. Thank you, Miss.
Thank you.
Okay,
Can
thank
I
you.
answer, Mas Danang?
Yeah, please. You can answer, Mbak.
Okay. Thanks so much for the question, Farah. Very interesting. And any type of prediction that we have is not 100% sure, right? I mean, even for the IPCC, because again, what happened is that all the actions that we are doing right now will change the situation. It has power to change the situation in the future. But there is a pessimistic note in the last IPCC report that I just showed in my presentation. So if we cannot achieve Paris Agreement, we cannot limit 1.5 degree warming. We don't have strategies implemented. We don't have capacity to deal with disasters. All of the global agreements combined with Sendai Framework, SDGs, if we cannot achieve that, there will be a narrower window of opportunity. Before I have slides of that, but I don't have it anymore. But it's like we have different pathways, let's say. It's in the IPCC report if you're interested as well. So if we cannot actually change the trajectory, so that's why I said always trajectory, because we have options. So if we take Paris Agreement seriously and Sendai Framework seriously can achieve the 1.5 degrees, we have more hope. But if we don't, then we don't have so much hope. That's a pessimistic type of perspective that I have. But of course, I mean, as human, we are even more resilient than before. I think, especially after the pandemic, we show that we are able to bounce back as a global community. Of course, every individual have different problems, different dilemmas. Maybe some of you lost your families, your friends. It's sad, but then we are still here. We are still here, and we show that we are able to bounce back. So that's the optimistic voice in my head that keeps me, for example, talking about climate and disasters, even though I know that we now already achieve 1.2 degrees. But we still have 0.2 degrees to avoid, let's say, to keep. Even if we achieve 1.5 degrees, the next goal is not 1.6, but 1.5.0001. So see, I think it's very good to just keep optimistic about this, but being also critical about what will happen if we don't do some things by now, or by the time that we get kind of deadline from the scientists, let's say. So that's the only thing I can say maybe.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mbak Annisa. And then I think the last is related to the you mentioned before about the Sendai and then about the COP, but is how do you think about the corruption in the governments related to this situation? Perhaps because they lack of the institution or something like that. Is it also have the impact to the achievement of the target of the like the you said about the achieving the 1 degree and something like that. So I think this is the last question and you can answer.
Yes, thanks for the question. Yeah, corruption is a big challenge. Yeah, it really hampers the implementation, of course, because, for example, if someone have more finance to adapt or mitigate, but then when it got corrupted, then of course we have less, right? It only kind of benefit certain people, but not serving a public interest, let's say. And this is a systemic issue that I don't know how to answer to this question. But I always think like we always have a role, like the previous question. I don't know if a person who asked that, what is your name again? I'm very sorry. Who is that again, Mas Dana, who asked?
The ask is Muhammad Sikandar, I think. Sikandar is asking.
Sikandar. Yeah, I don't know, but I mean, for example, if you are a student or if you're a professional, you keep your value with you, you keep your norm with you. For students, you know how bad is our situation right now because of the systemic issue like corruption. Then you keep in mind when you are becoming governmental officers or whatever role you have, and you have influence to finance power, then keep in mind that you have to exercise it wisely, because an act of one person, if it's accumulated, it will be a systemic problem like what we experience right now. And there's no easy solution. Then again, trying to redefine what is our norm and value as individuals, again, building up more collective values again, and try to change the system, hack the system in a way that you can do in your capacity.
Okay, thank you so much, Annisa. But unfortunately, our time is limit, and also the student perhaps have another class. And of course, thank you so much for discussion and the material. And perhaps you can give the closing statement from all of this discussion, and then something want to say from you, and please as the closing statement.
Yes, so the closing statement will be just to say thank you to the participants and also the organizer from IPB, Mas Danang. Maybe you can also send my greetings to Mbak Melani as well, and
of
Mbak
course,
Pini.
of course. I will talk to them. Yeah.
And Professor Arif Satria, the director of the IPB. Very nice song that he sang in the introduction. And to all of you participants, I think with climate and disaster issues, it's important to always be aware that this is a very, very crucial issue that we have to anticipate. We have to know that it's very uncertain and very complex. I think the big message from this meeting is that we all know that we have roles. We all know that we have a piece of the puzzle that we have to contribute to whatever capacity we have. So for all the students, study best, I guess, but also keep in mind your other activities that can benefit your environment and society. For all the professionals, you're very crucial. You have a very crucial role in implementing all of these policies and making sure that we achieve our goals. That's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Mbak Annisa, for sharing to us in the early morning, I think. And perhaps after this, you can take your breakfast, enjoy. And then thank you so much also for the all participants for the question and then the discussion. Hopefully, we will take a little part of the action to reduce the problem of the disaster and also contribute to the climate change reduction. Okay. And then again, I as a moderator, I apologize if it is not very good in the term of the lead this discussion, but I hope the information shared by the Mbak Annisa will enhance our knowledge and of course will increase our curiosity to take more bigger part in the action of the climate change. Then thank you so much, Mbak Annisa, once again, and all the participants. And I close this session. Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. But after this, please take the photo before all of you leave. And Didan, could you help us to take the photo and can count? Yeah, please open your mic for the, not mic, I'm open your video and then we can see all of your face if it's possible.
Okay, everyone. I have two slides in my computer.
Okay.
Please keep smile and 3, 2, 1. Okay. Again, next slide. 3, 2, and 1.
Okay, thank you so much, Didan, and thank you so much again, Mbak Annisa. I will tell to Mbak Pini and Mbak Melanie also. Okay, thank you for all of the participants. Have a good day, all of you.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Dr.